So I would like to thank the organizers and everyone who came to listen. I'm trying to tell a post-humanist history of this very place, and this is quite an experiment. Posthumanism and transhumanism lend themselves to thinking about present appearances and future possibilities. But how does one use posthumanist thinking to write stories of the past, considering that human fingers produce most of the evidence? One possibility is to discuss past manifestations of posthumanist thought and practice were at play, and we've seen several examples of that kind. Another possibility is telling a familiar story, but doing it posthumatively. And my attempt is of the second kind. So I will begin by telling the life stories of bees and hives at the turn of the 20th century, discuss the relations between machine and time, and then talk about the meanings human made of honey flow 100 years ago, not far from here. Okay. Like many European and American travelers, honeybees began to travel throughout Palestine in the last decades of the 20th century. Through their new travels, many of them gathered the nectar of orange blossom on the coast for the very first time. With this encounter, they started working tirelessly to transfer the domination of the booming citrus industry away from indigenous hands. As a result, money was flowing into Jewish pockets and honey flowing into European mouths. While nothing is surprising about bee flight, late 19th century circumstances created a new type of movement for the bees. Beyond the local Holy Land tourism frenzy, bee travels were part of the extensive exploration projects in all European colonies. In particular, they related to contemporary global attempts to find the ultimate race of bees. Many kinds of bees were competing according to quality and amount of honey produced, character, and resistance to diseases. Already in the first decades of the 20th century, the Italian bee established itself as the preferred breed in most parts of the globe. But there were several other types of bees that were thought to hold wonderful qualities and unknown transformative power. Those were the bees of the East, the Apis dorsata. And here is an example of one of those bees. As you can see, it was born in 1905 in India and died in 1905. Until the late 19th century, bees in Palestine were familiar with the limited variety of flora, with whatever they encountered in a radius of about 2 miles of flight. They created honey during a short period of the year, and some of them lived in human-made hives, which were usually long, cylindrical, and made of clay, and then piled up into stacks. And this is one documentation of these hives. Now I quote, "The bees seem to be able to live healthily in them," indicated one source. "There is no record of disease, and the honey is often of excellent quality," end quote. Bees build the honeycomb anew after every swarming season, since humans had to break the hives in order to extract the honey they thought they made for themselves. Honey was valued in Palestine as an article of food, and was often thought to hold medicinal qualities. It was usually consumed locally and at times sold in nearby markets. Bees in Palestine, that were often called holy bees, were praised for their nature, and I quote, "The Palestine bees are good honey gatherers, and the queens are very prolific and beautiful. It is not rare to have colonies yielding upward of 100 pounds for a single crop, although this is not the average," end quote. Already in the early 20th century, the life of bees in Palestine, as well as the honey they produced, were utterly different. Bees continued to fly and collect nectar and pollen and made honey for humans to enjoy, but their labor and behavior changed. This happened because a new type of hive, the movable frame beehive, arrived in the area from North America, and in exchange, several Palestinian queens traveled to North America, and others reached Java that same year. The search for the ultimate bee for honey production and fertilization of plants is what brought the movable hive into Palestine in 1880. Along with the process of measurements and documentation of the local breed, as well as its tongue capabilities, the new expensive wooden machine became a home for local bees. Official records There's some part missing for some reason. Okay. Official records show that the movable frame beehive was born in 1852 in Philadelphia. So you can see its birth. The hive crossed the ocean and traveled across Europe until it reached the Middle East when it was 28. Local creatures liked the new hive because it had many advantages. Of course, it was a young model covered with fashionable materials. The new hive had a longer lifespan, it was mobile, and hence made its appearances throughout the country. Most importantly, it was productive. No longer was there a need to break the fixed clay hives in order to extract the honey. As its name implies, each of the many frames could now be removed from within square boxes, and the honey would flow with the use of a centrifuge. In the new hive, thanks to what humans called bee space, the honeycomb would stay intact, so that the bees did not need to build it anew anymore. Bees could now spend more of their time making honey. And this is the standard Langstroth movable frame beehive as we know it today. As a matter of fact, not only each movable frame, but also the entirety of the new beehive was now mobile. Together with many other soon-to-arrive technologies like trains, sewing machines, and electricity that had to do with movement in the Middle East, these new hives were created to move. With pastoral beekeeping, bees in boxes moved throughout Palestine in sync with blooming plants, so that the bees could make honey year-long. The new movement of bees was part of a newly emerging wide-scale technological system that including, among others, honey-making machines, irrigation pumps, roads and cars, as well as different kinds of workers. Human explorers left the region shortly, but not long after, the global beekeepers community promoted the Italian bees the best of breeds. But the new hive gained prominence in Palestine. Long-distance travels became part of the lives of bees in Palestine, and their honey reached European markets, its flavors now altering between thyme, prickly pear, and citrus fruits. The bees adopted the hives as their home. They reached places they've never seen and tasted things they'd never tasted before. The new hive transformed their life and what it meant to be a bee. They were no longer seasonal workers, and so they too became better producers. The hive offered a more stable home for them, environment, as it never broke like the old hive, even though it did move to new terrains. The bees became permanent migrants and got to form new relationships, such as the one with the oranges of the shore, a relationship that, as I noted, brought both the bees and the oranges much acclaim. It took a while, but its success was sweeping, and while competition between the old and the new continued for several decades, the movable frame beehive settled rather successfully and hence multiplied in Palestine. And here you can see very successfully settling hives in 1931. It was so successful that no new model ever replaced it. Indeed, until today, the 19th century movable frame beehive is the squarish home for most known honeybees. But there's a moment missing from the story of holy bees and migrating wooden machines. In the early 20th century Palestine, at least for a short while, and prior to the widespread constructions of roads and availability of cars, bees lived inside new movable frame beehives, but traveled on old transport technologies. The transformation and the movement of bees, which was local just as it was global, ultimately depended on old forms of movement. Historian David Edgerton examines the old that is part of the utilization of new technologies, as well as the changes in technologies over time. In so doing, he argues against the centrality of inventions and inventors in the historical analysis, as well as the equation of technology with progress. Communication and science researcher Stephen Jackson thickens this description of the timeliness of technologies and coined the term broken world methodology. I follow both these scholars and argue that in Palestine at the turn of the century, new spatial experiences were entangled with Creole technologies. That is, that new capabilities were meshed with old world habits. While the fixedness of the traditional hive fit the Western image of Palestine as the immovable East, as one beekeeper called it, Movement existed all along in various, often forgotten ways. This shift from the static to movable hive depended on older, local forms of movement. This picture, again, from 1890, illustrates how for a brief moment in time, the new movement of bees was made possible by the old movement of camels. This image of bees traveling on other animals captures such real technology in the midst of change, where new technologies of movement were combined with existing local ones. In addition to camels, according to one account, movable beehives were also carried on heads of women across the country, one hive at a time. Together with the anonymous creature on the right, camels and local women were essential for the abruption of new movement. Beyond the new technology, therefore, this picture exhibits some of the actors, human and non-human, that remain an invisible force of change in the East. Such new and sophisticated machines as the wooden hives were successful in Palestine not because they were successful everywhere, but because they became intertwined with old, local, often living ones. Furthermore, long after camels were deemed unnecessary or even interfering with moving bees, backstagers continued to be locomotors. All technologies are Creole technologies. What was perhaps most remarkable about this tightening bond between the new hives and the bees in Palestine was that it became a tool for the production of scientific truths as well as a reconfirmation of religious beliefs. And we heard actually a similar example on Friday by Dor Ramati, who told us about the phonograph, and I interpreted what he said as showing how the phonograph was a tool to proving what was authentic Judaism. Humans of the West have for long considered the land of Palestine to be unusual, a holy land. Travelers and settlers in Palestine in the period considered themselves to be modern and scientific, and at the same time, they thought of Palestine as the land of the Bible, relying on the Bible as a historical document, but they expected Palestine to be fertile and plentiful. The expectations, however, were largely unfulfilled. A British human traveler to Palestine noted in 1882, My first strong impression, and I may say, my last on beholding Palestine, was one of astonishment. Can this be the glory of all land, that promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey? No, surely not. I had pictured fertile plains and dewy meads, cultivated lands bringing forth luxuriant crops, and almost spontaneously. Palestine of all countries is now desolate, barren, and accursed. Another view of the land of Palestine from 1922 demonstrates the same perception of decline. Okay, not yet. So I quote, Palestine blossoms as the rose once the winter is over. It flows with milk and honey, milk from the cattle on the spring pastures, honey which the bees collect from the myriad flowers. The carelessness of man has reduced woodland and allowed terraces and irrigation channels to decay, so that the whole country now has an impoverished look. So a repetition of this narrative of decline. In order to settle this gap between what they imagined to find and the reality they encountered, human settlers turned to science and technology in order to expose the virtue of the land. It is this attempt that I call technomysticism. Through the process of exposing, settlers quite literally adopted the phrase "the land flowing with milk and honey" as a model for what the land should be like. And this is a report sent in 1921 to the U.S. State Department from Palestine, demonstrating the success in its interpretation of the success of honey production. The title of the report is Palestine Honey Production, and it reads, whether or not Palestine may literally become a land flowing with milk and honey is now being tested in a practical and commercial manner. In times when the land of Palestine seemed to Western minds to be particularly distant from the land of the Bible, settlers decided to demonstrate their proximity in particular ways. For them, a land flowing with honey was no longer a metaphor, it was a reality waiting to happen. The growing abundance of honey that bees now produced in movable frame beehives was thus interpreted as an evidence that the land of Palestine was becoming a holy land again, that it was indeed flowing with honey. Studies of modern Palestine and Israel usually focus on the struggle of European powers for political and economic control, the formation of Jewish and Palestinian nationalism, or the establishment of the Israeli state. During the same period and in the same geographical place, however, another process unfolded, the making of a Holy Land. The story of bees and hives is part of a larger project, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my dissertation, which examines how human settlers who attributed special qualities to the land, as was already noted, used science and technologies to erect a religious past. This process was fundamental to the transformation of the landscape and lives of human, animals, and other machines in the Middle East in the 20th century. Beyond hives and bees, I analyzed the invention of the Hebrew cow, which was considered to be, and I quote, a very sophisticated machine already in the 1930s, and more recently claimed a milk-yield world champion. I also examined the transformation in the lives of sheep. And here you can see one recalcitrant sheep breaking free from her scientific reality and leading her sheep friends outside of the pen. Finally, I look at the local milk producer, the goat, and how it came to be seen as the enemy of nature, especially if it was black. The goat, like the airplane at war, noted a man whose eyes loved looking at young forest trees just as much goats enjoyed eating them. He's a machine of astonishing efficiency which spreads wide destruction. As always is the case, the manipulation of landscape and bodyscapes were entangled with the shaping of the social world. As part of the technomystical paradigm, various types of bodies, like bees and hives, cows, and even women, moved and were appropriated for the creation of a plentiful land in Palestine. Thank you.